All right. Let's do this thing. I have Professor Michael Easter. Is that correct? Professor? Doctor?
Yeah, I guess technically, professor.
Technically.
Yeah.
All right. You may be the first professor on the show, but it's an honor. Thank you for being here. And
Yeah.
most importantly, platform for today's conversation, author, right? The Comfort Crisis, Embrace Discomfort to Reclaim Your Wild, Happy, Healthy Self. I'm super psyched to talk to this today, Michael. Appreciate your time.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for having me. Should be fun.
Yeah, I just finished the book over the weekend, as I mentioned off air. It's, maybe to throw a couple teasers in for the audience as we start the conversation. One of the things I'm really huge on with this audience and this show is actionable advice. So I'm going to tell you, you've already inspired me to change and do a few things. So I went and found my ruck and my 30-pound ruck plate, dusted that thing off, going to get the rucking back in order. I have a buddy scheduled we're going to go do a walk here later this week, and I got the kettlebells out. So we're going to do a suitcase carry.
Nice. I like it.
And I'll confess, I'm sitting here at the moment, but I did order a stand-up desk, and your book reminded me I need to put this thing together and assemble it and get back into a standing rather than a seated position.
Nice. I like it. It's resonating. The pieces I set up, the dominoes are falling exactly.
The dominoes are falling.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. There's so much in here. It's crazy on human performance. I mean, I got the book and I got interested after I read your article on rucking and the human adaptation and rucking kind of putting us to the apex predator position in our survival and our evolution.
Yeah.
But then, I mean, just the title of the book is so perfect with I love focusing on growth through adversity. But as I dug in, I mean, just the laundry list of research you've brought out and stories that you've woven in around what, ultimately I thought I was getting a book about this epic adventure, this hunt for caribou you went on in the Alaskan Arctic. But man, you've got mobility, Kelly Starrett, Dr. Starrett, you've got Jason Fung, intermittent fasting, you've got microbiome, you've got inflammation. I mean, gosh, you got the whole thing in mental and physical human performance in here. So I'm super psyched to get into it. With all that, how would you describe the book? Because it's so broad, so rich. How would you describe it to the audience?
Yeah, I would say the short answer is that the book looks at how, as the world has become more comfortable in a lot of ways, so we're less challenged in our lives, things are a lot easier. As this technology has improved our lives and made them more comfortable, we've actually lost a lot of what makes us healthy and happy, I argue. So to sort of look into that and tell that story, I spent more than a month in the Arctic, and I traveled the world and spoke to experts like researchers at Harvard and doctors at the Mayo Clinic, even Buddhist leaders, special forces soldiers. And these are all sort of people who are finding in their own way that reinserting a handful of fundamental discomforts that humans faced as we were evolving tends to reverse a lot of the problems that we have nowadays and face in modern life. These sort of new, strange issues we have that we haven't had in the past, and because of our comfortable environments, are coming to a head, I would say.
Great. Yeah, I like that description of it. I was jotting down a couple of things here, like how would I describe it? And I think you say some of this. It's almost about becoming harder to kill, or conversely, living longer in healthy and happy ways.
Yeah, I think so. I think that, look, like, the modern world is freaking amazing in every single way. We don't have to go out and toil in a field for work anymore, right? We have easy access to food. Like, how often are people hungry in the US anymore? Like, not often. Yeah. On and on and on. Like, when we're bored, we can watch Netflix. Like, all these things are great. Don't get me wrong. But the problem is that as we evolved in these uncomfortable environments where everything took effort and challenge, like, if you would do the most comfortable, easiest thing, that kept you alive. That really served you. It made sense to do the really easy thing and comfortable thing for all of time. And then when our environments changed in the last 100 years or so, this is no longer the case. So it's like now, because for example, take exercise. That's a really easy one to grasp. It's like, as we evolved, it made no sense to move if you didn't have to. Now, life, of course, forced you into a certain amount of movement, right? Because you had to either hunt or gather, or, you're always moving around to sort of stay alive. So we developed drives to be lazy where we could, to save energy, because energy was at a premium. But you apply that in today's world where we really don't have to move. Our environments don't force us to move. This backfires, and we can, take 1,000, 2,000 steps a day and be totally fine and survive and live on. But of course, that comes with a lot of downsides, right? Obesity and the problems that come with it being obvious, chronic disease, and even mental health problems, So that's just one example among many, many that I point out in the book.
Yeah, you do. You have a ton in here of what really is the crisis, right? The physical and the mental health crisis. And the book, the timing of the book is so amazing, coming off of a quarantine and this COVID crisis, right? That's been a huge focus on health, but it's been a huge focus for people in terms of isolation, in terms of activity. Some people literally weren't allowed out of their homes into public for a while,
Totally.
right? Certain places in the world. And we're here recording this in on the Independence Day weekend, right? 4th of July weekend here in the US. So in a lot of ways, I found the book to be it sets up a lot of contrasts. It was kind of like you're saying, survival was about, we're programmed for comfort, but this is a relative thing. Today's comfort is way off the end of the spectrum.
Yep.
So there's so many of these contrasts in here. And I mentioned July 4th weekend, right? Because you mentioned in the book that America has created special forces soldiers who are arguably some of the fittest people in the world or in history. And at the same time, as a nation, we have a health crisis physically, in terms of physical health.
Yeah. I mean, I think that through all of time, it's like there was always usually a warrior class, right? And then just the average people in a society or tribe or whatever it was. But like the gap between the fitness level between those two groups used to be pretty small, because people to live was to put in effort. So you just became fit by virtue of living in a world where things weren't easy. But nowadays, things can be easy. So we have these special forces soldiers where we have all this science and interesting ways of training and just getting people to be absolute like freaks in the grand scheme of time and space, fitness wise, right? But then at the opposite end, 72% of Americans are either overweight or obese. I think our average, I think only 20% of people hit the government's guidelines for fitness, which are like not hard to hit, by the way. I'm not like, the government is not telling you, go do CrossFit 5 times a week. I mean, the government is basically saying like, do some sort of activity, and things like gardening count for at least 150 minutes, and then just lift something heavy twice a week, just really basic stuff. And only 20% of people hit it, because we don't, we have those drives to be lazy, and they tell us like, why the hell would you go into the gym? I mean, it is a strange activity in the grand scheme of time and space to exercise. Exercise is something we freaking invented once we realized like, oh, now that we've engineered movement out of our days, we're a lot less healthy. I guess we need to figure out a way to put it back in our days, and we'll do this and we'll call it exercise, right? So
150 minutes a week
is a
pretty crazy low standard.
Yeah. And it's like, like I said, gardening, and I think like walking, if you're like at a decent pace, brisk walking is what they count it as. So it's not anything crazy to hit.
If you look at the body mass index scale, the BMI scale, I think the threshold to what's considered obese is, I mean, I don't know if there's technically a class of super obese now.
Yeah, there is.
Is there? Okay.
Yeah.
Because our BMI scale would put many people by percentage of population as obese, and we must have a whole nother end of the spectrum there now as well.
Yeah, I think that I want to say like 35% are obese in the US, and I think 8% among those are what's classified as extremely obese. So that's like another level. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So it really is a crisis. And you get into some of the stats and the research in the book of how many years it can literally take off someone's life. Obesity, I think, was something like up to 15 or 20 years off somebody's life.
Yeah. And it's a lot of the data suggests that just being completely unfit and obese takes more years off your life than smoking. It's like, we know smoking is like terrible for you, right? But like the combined effects of obesity and lack of fitness can be even worse.
Even worse. I just took one of my dogs to the vet a couple of weeks ago, and it's a small dog, but the doctor freaked out. The vet, like, this dog is 2 pounds heavier than last time I saw it. Like, you have to make massive changes immediately, or you're going to have severe health consequences. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know why my MD doesn't talk to me the same way.
Yeah. It's tricky. I feel like we're kind of, society's set up in such a way that we don't want to hurt people's feelings or make them feel bad. And, like, weight is complicated, and like, I'm not going to deny that at all. And I think that there's a lot of things that go into it, but at the end of the day, there's like some research from Harvard I really like, because it basically just says, look, like, at the end of the day, personal responsibility is number one. And like, unfortunately, when you look at data, like, data doesn't care about your feelings. It doesn't, So I think that sometimes, back to your point about COVID, I guess, is that I do feel like for some people it was a wake-up call where they went, oh, if I'm in this category, I'm more likely to, if I get COVID, I'm more likely to have extreme complications. I'm more likely to be put on a ventilator. I'm more likely to die from it. I think that sometimes in life we do need kind of like a smack in the face that goes, oh, I need to maybe make some changes,
Yeah, hopefully it was, right, a wake-up call for a number of people. I know you also talk about weight a bit in the book, as you were training for your epic adventure up to Alaska for this caribou hunt. You brought out a name for these kind of things, or a word for it, that you came across in your research. Misogi, is that the right way to say it?
Yeah. So I met this guy whose name is Marcus Elliott, and he got his MD at Harvard. So he's a super smart guy. Once he graduated, decided he didn't want to be a doctor. He was going to try and revolutionize sports science. And he more or less did it. Like, he's really applied big data, biometrics, like AI, all this really techie number stuff to movement and training. And so he's worked for a lot of different big pro teams, but he now has his own facility, and he has a contract with the NBA. I think more than 60 or 70% of NBA players have gone through his system. But he also knows that really what improves human health and performance, it can't always be measured, right? There are just certain gears that people have where you put them in a situation, they're like, I got this, they've got like this potential that's just there. And so to get to that, he does this thing he calls Misogi. And the basic idea is that once a year, you're going to pick something really hard, just make it up out in nature and go do it. The rules have to be, one, really hard, like I said, and he defines that by saying you have a 50-50 shot finishing it. Rule number two, very simple, don't die. And so, for example, they've done things like, they got an 85-pound rock, and him and a few people, they walked it 5 miles underneath the Santa Barbara Channel. So one guy would go down, pick up the rock, walk, and so on and so forth until it was like at the other side. Done things like really long stand-up paddleboard sessions where they hadn't really stand-up paddleboarded before. All kinds of weird stuff. And it is weird. But the idea is that, as humans evolved, we had to do challenging stuff in nature all the time. And there was no safety net, right? So this could be something like, we have to move from point A to point B, from like summering to wintering grounds, or we have to be successful on this epic hunt, or else we're all going to starve to death, or there's, a tiger lurking in the bushes, whatever it might be. We no longer have those sort of challenges. But in the past, when we used to do those type of things, we would learn a lot about our potential and what we were capable of, because we get put in positions where, like, if I fail, things are not going to go well. So I have to keep pushing beyond what I think my edge is. Right. And we would even engineer these into our lives in things like traditional rites of passage, where, we're sending a young person out because they're at point A. We need to get them to point B. And we're going to do that by putting them through something really physically, psychologically, and emotionally challenging out in nature. And so the idea with Misogi is that they're trying to capture a lot of that magic to sort of show people that, your potential is a lot bigger than you are aware of. Because in modern life, we never get these moments that sort of push us out to our edges and beyond them. And we realize, oh, I thought my edge was here, but I'm beyond it. And what else in my life am I selling myself short on? So yeah, it's kind of a weird way to do it, but I mean, I honestly think it works.
I love it. Right. I look at it as like training a muscle. It's training a mental muscle, really. And I
Mm-hmm.
happen to write down one of the quotes you had in the book from Marcus, which was about you mentioned the edge of the comfort zone. He says, in Misogi, you'll reach the edge where you're convinced you have nothing left, but you'll keep going anyway. And then you'll look back and you'll be way out beyond where you were certain your edge was, and you won't forget that.
Yeah.
So it resets the bar higher, right?
Yeah, totally. So that bar is reset. And then, the point, you're not just doing this to do it. Like, now that that bar has been reset, you can go back into your normal life, your everyday life at the office or whatever you do at the warehouse. I don't know, whatever your job is, with that new bar. And you can use that to your advantage. It's like once you've done something like a Misogi and learn something about yourself, all of a sudden the sort of stuff we get worked up about in modern life, whether it's like giving a presentation at work or, oh, I have a deadline, I need to like get this spreadsheet in by a certain time. It's like, it kind of reframes it and goes like, one, I can do this, it's fine. And two, like, this isn't that big of a deal,
Not life or death.
not life or death.
Usually,
No.
for
Yeah.
most people. Right. No, and I love the tie to the rite of passage events, whether we're doing those as adults or,
Mm-hmm.
so I have a 13-year-old boy. So
Yeah.
I think a lot about this kind of stuff. And you mentioned the elements of rite of passage where you separate somebody from the tribe, you go out and do those physically, emotionally, mentally hard things, and then you reintegrate with an enhanced role in the tribe. So
Yeah.
I'm taking my son camping and some other dads and boys here, I think next weekend,
Nice.
and it's just going to be kind of local, but we're building in some silly things for them to do. Like
Cool.
I think we're going to park the vehicles a couple miles away, and every time they want food and water, if it's mealtime, well, guess what? You got to hike 2 miles to the vehicle and bring
Yeah.
back some gallons of water that are heavy. Silly
Nice.
stuff like that.
No, that's super cool because we don't, in the book, I talk about how helicopter parenting really started in the 90s, for a variety of reasons I won't get into. But in the generations after helicopter parenting started, those kids have way higher mental health problems than the generations before them. And the reason is because, when you haven't really been challenged in life, repercussions come from that once eventually something does challenge you, right? So it's like if you've had someone doing everything for you, handling all the hardships you would face, like happens in helicopter parenting, when you get into, let's say a classroom, if the professor goes, well, I disagree with you, why do you think that? It's like, that can be tough for you. Or if you don't get enough likes on Instagram, that can be tough for you, right? And like that like anxiety people feel is absolutely real. It just lacks perspective. So if you can do things like you're talking about, all of a sudden, for the example of your son, like, he'll have done some challenging stuff, and then maybe the rest of life will be a little easier.
Right. Yeah. So I did, I'm a paper book guy. So for the most part, I read your book, but I
Nice.
bought the audio book as well. And I put it on while I had my son in the truck going to one of his soccer camps,
Nice.
and just was trying to get a little bit filtered in there of around just programming ourselves to do hard stuff, to embrace the idea of these manufactured crucibles. So
Mm-hmm.
then we're training for when life throws us the hard stuff, whether it's, I don't know, rejection for a soccer tryout, whether it's, the grade you got in school, or how your
Yeah.
teacher showed up that day, or, what it might look like in the job place, right? We're doing hard things to train ourselves for real life is the way I look at it.
Yeah, totally. And apologies for William, the character in the book, all his F words.
Yeah, no worries. He definitely hears it on the soccer pitch as well. And one of the things I just did recently, so he and I do these, I got stuff behind me here. My family did this metal board for me from Spartan, right? And
Nice.
he does kids Spartan stuff,
Oh,
which are
cool.
these, it's like an obstacle course trail run. And the obstacles, we look at them as, it's a competition, but it's a metaphor for life, right? It's a
Yeah.
chance to fail, learn from your failure, try again, figure out what you're going to do, go around it, do burpees, whatever you got to do.
Yeah.
And
100%. That's super cool.
yeah. And if you haven't heard of, there's a couple of events out here in Southern California. If you get a chance to hook up with these guys, Bedros Keuilian, if you've ever heard of Bedros, he's running a program that he calls the Modern Day Night program.
Okay.
And it's trying to reinvent sort of manhood and young men and rite of passage events. So I just went and did his 75-hour adult male event, which is all
Cool.
about kind of doing hard stuff for a long time, stuff that sucks for a real long time, and you just got to surrender to the process.
Nice.
And then they have one for fathers and their teenage boys. Same
cool.
idea, shorter, 12, 14 hours. And it puts the boys into some, some hard things, some leadership things, some communication things, teaches them about themselves and about each other. I got off on that tangent because F-bombs. They have, there's a Marine, an MMA, a SWAT, and a Navy SEAL that are the instructors there. So he's heard of it. He's heard of it. Good. Your book wasn't the first one by any means.
Good.
Yeah. So, do you mind if I'd love to hear a little bit more about the hunt, but do you mind if I crank through just a few of the kind of things in the book that I wanted to make sure I ask you about? So, of hard things, right? That we're experienced as we evolved as humans and that we're really programmed for. And maybe it kind of gets back to some of these contextual things as well. So, hunger, right? Like these days we don't have to be hungry. But in history, for a long time, we primarily were. We were very active. We were burning a lot of calories, and food was scarce, right? So you talk a bit about fasting, intermittent fasting. You bring out some of Dr. Jason Fung's references. There's something in there I wanted to ask you about. You mentioned, so I think a lot of people have heard of intermittent fasting, daily intermittent fasting, or doing a 24 or 3-day fast these days. You mentioned sort of hungry days. So I think you mentioned a couple hungry days a week or a few hungry days in a row on a monthly basis. Are those just low calorie days, or what does that do to reset the system?
Yeah, I see those more as low calorie days. And really what we're getting at here is if you look at a lot of the research, it basically says that 80% of eating from the average person is driven by reasons other than true physiological hunger. So it is because certain time on the clock. It's breakfast time. I always eat at breakfast time. I'm stressed. You know what would fix this is like a handful of M&Ms or a meal, whatever it is. So the idea is that we often don't know what hunger really feels like because we rarely have to experience it. Now, this is obviously good in the grand scheme of time and space. But if you're always eating, especially for reasons other than hunger, it's going to come with some problems, So I think that honestly, stress eating is a huge driver of the obesity epidemic because food is a really cheap way to deal with your problems. And so the idea of doing a hungry day is that not that I necessarily have to have this scheduled fast or whatever. It's that I just want to put myself in a position where, I feel a little bit of hunger and I'm like, oh, yeah, this is like weird. It's uncomfortable. But at the same time, I think what really works people up is the idea of being hungry, not hunger itself. That's what they panic over. Because once you actually are hungry, once you've been removed from food for, say, 12, 15, 16 hours, whatever it is, hunger doesn't like build and build and build until your head explodes. It's like you feel it someday, you're like, oh, yeah, I'm hungry. I could really use food. But then when your attention goes elsewhere, it's kind of like, oh, yeah, I'm fine. Like it's just not, it's not that bad. Now, of course, it does get bad over time, but we don't usually give ourselves that amount of, time away from food. So I think it's just another way to get people to feel hunger, just a different form.
Okay. Yeah, got it. I know there's so much good stuff that happens when you put our bodies in that kind of stress.
Yeah.
The healing, the growth, the HGH promotion, the autophagy, right? Stage that you get to. And the mental aspect, like you're saying as well, right? Of I can be hungry, but I can go on. When you I found when you first start to fast, you go like, what am I going to do with that time that I didn't,
right.
go to a meal, because it is social in our culture, in a lot of cultures. And we've also been sold some ideas, like this idea that breakfast is the most important meal of the day and it needs to be eaten early in the day, and all the things that go around what we should eat for breakfast. That's a whole business in itself.
Yeah. And I think that like when you look at how people, when someone wants to lose weight, the average person is like, okay, I need to lose weight. What should I eat? Why don't we? It's a lot more productive to just be like, what shouldn't I eat? Right? Like, just time away. Like, I know that there's some like debate around this, but I'm of the belief that calories we just eat too much energy in general. And that is kind of the main reason behind obesity. So the question for me is like, what can people do to lower the overall energy that they're taking in? And I think that fasting is a good way to do it. Now, as I talk about in the book, it's like, if you're going to do, let's say, a 16-hour fast and then 8-hour eating window, like, I don't think you're going to lose weight if you pack that 8 hours in with like 4,000 calories. Like, the math just doesn't work out, you know? But I do think that if someone is consciously being like, hey, I actually don't realize I'm not even really that hungry for the 16-hour window. So I'm just going to eat a few reasonable meals in this 8 hours. I'm going to get some benefits in those 16 hours, some like side health benefits that are great, but I'm also just not going to overeat calories because I've got this window for myself, and that's going to drive a lot of good things too. So
Yeah, that makes sense. And you mentioned also something else. I didn't realize it had a name, but the Hawthorne effect, this idea of awareness just
yeah.
around doing something like tracking calories
Yeah,
and
I think
bring,
so.
sorry, go
Yeah.
ahead.
I was gonna say, I think the other problem is that people have zero idea how much they eat, and like I was guilty of this. I started in the book. I introduced this character. His name's Trevor Cashy, and he's just like off the charts, brilliant. I don't even think he's 30 yet, which embarrasses me. But I mean, just look, for my job, I've had to interview like scientists at every major Ivy League university, people in top positions in government. And like, this kid is the brightest person I've ever talked to. And he got his PhD when he was, I think, like 22, and did some cancer research, and then decided he wanted to, help people through nutrition. And so he has this nutrition company. And a big part of what he does is just getting people aware of what they're eating, why they're eating, and how much they're eating. Like, research shows people miscalculate how much they eat like crazy. Someone who's of a normal BMI usually miscalculates by 400 calories. But if you're overweight on average, you're miscalculating by at least 800. So that suggests to me that like the problem isn't like the problem's you're eating too much and you have no idea how much you're eating. Like, you're just completely unaware of the quantities you're eating. So if you can get people to become more aware, teach them what a freaking portion size is. Because nowadays, like, we have this totally skewed sense of like, what is a portion, right? I think that can move the ball a lot. I mean, it did for me. So for example, like, I've never been overweight, but I'm 6'1". I used to be 185. And every day at lunch, I'd have like a protein shake, an apple with peanut butter. When I started working with Trevor and I had to like actually measure out my peanut butter for the first time, I thought I was having a serving. I was actually having 3. So that's like 600 calories. It's like, well, no shit, I couldn't like lose the 5 pounds I wanted to, right? Or 10 pounds or whatever it was. And it's like, once I became aware of like, oh, that's actually how much that is, all of a sudden it was like, bam, things just changed. So
Yeah, I could see that, and I can relate to that. I spent 6 or 7 months abroad backpacking around at one point, and then I came back to the U.S. and I couldn't finish the portion size at a restaurant dinner. Right? Our
yeah.
portions are huge, out and about, and then at home. Plus, you pack into this as well. Make no mistake, right? The food industry is huge, and the
Yeah.
science there that preys on our evolution, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's the colors that are in the packaging, right, in the food
Mm-hmm.
aisle, like the cereal aisle, are the colors of fruits, right? Because we're programmed to want to eat that or whatever it
Yeah.
is. And then caloric density
Yeah.
of our food. Just like you also mentioned boredom in the book. And I guess the way I took this was, we've got this genetic programming around boredom. We don't want to be bored. So when we're bored, we start to solve problems. We get creative. We invent
Yeah.
things, or we hunt, or we solve problems for our family, whatever it is, versus, again, money, technology, research, psychology. Now, when we're bored, we grab the phone and we're scrolling through Instagram or TikTok, and we're curing boredom that way. but perhaps we're stifling creativity or problem solving or
Yeah.
entrepreneurship.
Yeah. Yeah. You nailed it. And I mean, I was forced to really think about that and experience boredom when I was hunting in the Arctic, because we would sit there on this hill for like hours and hours. I didn't have my phone because, of course, it didn't work. Right. Um, didn't bring a magazine or book or any of that kind of stuff. And like all of a sudden you're bored again. It's like uncomfortable. And it's like, yeah, my mind went to some weird places, but it also like came up with some really good ideas and I'd write them down. And it's like today we don't have those opportunities for boredom to push us into something creative, something that can benefit our lives like it used to, because we just reflexively pull out the phone because that's the easiest way. It sort of hacks into this evolutionary hardware we have to, when we feel boredom, solve it with something, and something easy, hopefully, you know?
Right. So where you're, let's talk about Alaska a little bit. When
Yeah.
you're sitting out there, as you and three guys, you backpacked. Well, you flew in, and
Mm-hmm.
then backpacked further. You're rucking around. You're looking for herds of caribou that you were hunting, and yeah. So beyond boredom, what was which in a way I think would become a good thing, right? You probably after some time start to unwind. I think you mentioned some things around the power of nature in the book, and those pose a couple questions I wanted to ask you. So maybe put in the context of your time out there. I think one of the things you brought out was some research that takes about 3 days in nature, and then you could start to have the same effect as if you were meditating, getting the brain
Yeah.
from beta back into alpha and theta states. And then I think around that, you also brought out, for those of us who don't have maybe 4 or 5 weeks to spend in the Alaskan Arctic, as you did, some things around sort of minimal viable dose, if you will, of daily nature.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's interesting is being up in Alaska, it's like every single thing took effort. There's like, wild animals and crazy weather. And so you would think that I would be super just stressed and on edge, but the opposite was totally true. It's like, yeah, of course, when we would like see a grizzly bear, my heart would, like, my stress levels would go high, but then they drop down. Like overall, I'm much lower, less stressed, right? So when I got home, I kind of wanted to know what was going on, and it led me to this researcher named Rachel Hopman, and she's doing research on this idea called the nature pyramid. And it basically shows that, humans really benefit from different doses of nature, and in different types of nature. So at the bottom of this pyramid, it basically shows that 20 minutes, 3 times a week in the type of nature you can find anywhere, like on a really tree lined street, in a park, it's associated with a lot more calmness and focus. At the next level of the pyramid, 5 hours a month and a little bit more backcountry nature. So stuff that like you might have to drive there, or maybe you have to like get on a trail, but it's not super hard to come by, right? It's like kind of outside of the town or city. That's associated with a lot more, or a lot less depression and more happiness. And then at the very top, as you kind of mentioned, 3 or more days in super backcountry off the grid stuff that they'll do brain scans of people out there. They bring these complicated like brain measuring devices out there. And after 3 days in the wild, your brain starts to ride what are called alpha waves. These are the same waves found in experienced meditators, and they're associated with just feeling a lot more calm, a lot more at ease, a lot more creative, and just like, I feel great, right? Usually takes about 3 days to get there though. And so the message is kind of provides like a prescription, right, that you can use across the days, months, and years to get a lot of these benefits. And it goes from, mental health benefits, like I talked about, but also physical health benefits. Like take people out in nature and their blood pressure drops. All these physical health markers tend to improve as well. And the problem, of course, is that now people spend 95% of their time indoors, and so we're not getting a lot of these benefits that nature can give us. And I think it's almost like being low in a vitamin. You're going to have these problems if you don't meet like sort of the minimum requirement for a vitamin.
I like it. Vitamin nature.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I got to think there's another thing going on there as well, is just we come back from nature into our daily lives, and rather than you got that spike of stress around a grizzly, there's a lot of research that we maintain a high level of stress in our daily lives from modern stimulation, overstimulation. So cortisol levels, all these things are kind of permanently elevated for a lot of us that are hyper stressed.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. It's, there's a lot of reason that our stress drops in nature and that our stress tends to be higher in the modern world. I mean, one of the things most obvious is that when we're in nature, we're usually not like working. We're not like in this super hustle mode. So that's obviously a benefit, but there's more to it than that. There's the fact that we're usually moving around a little bit, but there's even that nature is a lot quieter than the landscapes we live in. And the noises it does have tend to be natural. And that seems to be calming for us. Also, the sights in nature. Nature is made up of these things called fractals that sort of make up the universe. And it's like these patterns that go from bigger to smaller to smaller to smaller. So think of like a tree, right? It's like big branch to smaller branch to smaller branch to smaller branch to leaf. And we don't get those in cities and at our homes. So it's all like right angles that are really plain. So there's like this myriad of things that we just don't get in the sort of hustle and bustle of modern life. And the one asterisk that I forgot to add to all that nature pyramid is that if you are using your cell phone while you're out there, anything from that 20 minutes, 3 times a week to the 3 days, like it cancels it all out because it pulls your brain back into this modern like hustle world.
Yeah, no bueno. I made a note. I wanted to mention to you a practice that somebody turned me on to. If you haven't tried this and you want to kind of stack some practices while you're out in nature, just I guess out in the Vegas desert or something like that,
Yeah.
right? It would be kind of a moving meditation outdoors in nature. So great if you do this barefoot, like and you're grounded somewhere, sand, grass, something like this. And it's a very slow walk. They call it a fox walk. So if you haven't heard of it, you could do something like 1 step per minute for 10 minutes.
Oh, that's
So
cool.
every step is super slow, super intentional as you move your foot and plant your
Yeah.
foot and shift your body weight. It just brings all kinds of awareness to that practice that you're doing. But
That's
the other
cool.
thing that's pretty amazing about it is you're just moving slowly for a period of time.
Yeah.
And nature starts to happen around you again. Like the birds come back, stuff that got scared away when you moved.
Yeah.
They start to kind of
That's
come
cool.
back in as you merge into their environment.
Yeah, I like that. Very cool.
Yeah, give it a try. So did you being up there for a while, were you conscious of sort of that stress level coming down and the changes that were happening to you, or did you realize it more in contrast once you came back to modern life?
Both. I mean, after a few days, it's just like, man, I feel awesome. And you start to like, it straightens out your priorities a bit. You start to like, you don't care about, stupid artificial deadlines and like a lot of the BS that we can get caught up chasing. You start to think more and care more about, the important stuff like family and friends and relationships and that kind of stuff. But then when you go back into the modern world, it's like very jarring after having been out that long. Like I remember when we got back to the hotel, it was kind of by an airport. And just because it's so silent up there, like so unbelievably silent. And I opened my hotel door and there was a plane taking off at the airport. And it just was like so loud, like, like, oh my God, it's like, welcome back, like we just don't even realize how loud and jarring the modern world is until we go into one that's totally opposite. So
yeah, sometimes we need those contrasts
to
appreciate, right? I really got a couple things the book was really good at for me was conveying some feelings around a couple things. So one was it really got this feeling of when you were embarking on the journey and getting into sort of these smaller and smaller planes to get to further and further places, how that was maybe a bit stressful, right? And then in contrast, sort of had this feeling that you wrote in there of when you were having to catch that plane to finally come out of the wilderness, almost like a sadness to have to get back on that plane and to get back to the modern world.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I think it was either like 5 or 6 planes to get up there. And they get successively smaller until like the last one only fits 2 people. You're jammed in there like a bobsled team, and it's literally just a frame wrapped in duct tape, more or less. And so, that's like super stressful. But like after encountering all the stuff and, in the wild, once we're up there, it's like getting back in that plane. I'm not really afraid of it anymore. Right. It's like, cause it's kind of reframed things for me. Um, I've kind of lost track of your question though. What was it?
Yeah, no, it's just sort of the contrast, and then the maybe in a way almost sadness of having to come back to
Oh,
sort of modern life, the busy world.
yeah. I was definitely excited. It just sort of reframed what I was excited to be back for. It's like I was really excited to see my wife, my dogs, that kind of stuff. Also, I was starving, so I was totally looking forward to having a normal meal. But it was one of those where I'm like, oh man, I'm really gonna miss this. Like, this is totally different and a lot more calming, and I just feel way different and just generally better day to day out here.
Pretty epic, pretty rare
Yeah,
for most of us.
yeah.
Some people are lucky to do more of this for work. Can you the other emotional part of it for me was, and maybe you could talk a little bit about this, was I don't think you were previously a big hunter. This is your first caribou hunt, I think.
Yeah.
Probably pretty rare for everybody. And you talk a little bit about the connection to the hunt, and then maybe how that feels coming back to the world, and how you look at meat on the shelf of the grocery store.
Yeah, for sure. So no, I went up with a guy named Donnie Vincent. He's this backcountry bow hunter and filmmaker. And if you haven't seen if you don't know who he is, go into YouTube and Google Donnie Vincent, Who We Are, and it'll kind of show you what he's all about. But he makes these movies that are basically like Planet Earth, except with hunting in them. And he's very conscious and ethical. Just a really, really interesting guy. And so he invited me up to the Arctic. And, initially I didn't plan on hunting. I told myself it was because I'm a journalist. I don't get involved in the story, but I think I just didn't want to cross that sort of ethical, or I guess emotional barrier. But he told me, I think you'll understand why I come up here and do what I do, and understand this experience a lot deeper if you hunt. So I told him, all right, I think I will. And, after a couple of weeks, we finally got in a position where I was going to hunt. Like, we had identified this old bull, and we had sort of crawled across the tundra to where we thought it was going to come over this saddle. And it eventually did. And, once we got it better in our sight, it was limping, super old, and something had happened to its leg. Like, we generally were looking for the oldest animals because that can really improve the health of a herd. Whereas, taking out younger species does the opposite. So this was the one. And even then, I purchased a hunting tag, carried this rifle for weeks. I have army crawled hundreds of yards across the tundra in the muck, and it's in my sights. And even then I'm like, oh man, I don't know if I want to do this. But I end up pulling the trigger, and the animal goes down. And my initial reaction was like, man, what have you done? Like, there's no coming back from this. This is gonna stain you forever. And look at this amazing animal, and it's no longer living, and that's on you. And I sat with it for a while, and then we started field dressing the animal, so like taking it apart for the meat. And it's in that moment that my mind sort of changed. Like, Donnie remembers me saying to him, like, oh, it's just meat. And so I think what it did is I got hit with this realization and this question. It was like, man, you eat meat like every single day, and never once have you felt an iota of emotion about that meat. And yet here you are with this meat, and you are a mess. You are having some feelings, my man. And I think what that did is it gave me a lot more respect for all the meat that I eat. So you would think that once someone starts hunting, they would eat more meat. And the reality has been totally opposite for me. I eat a lot less meat. I sort of look for ways. I mean, I still eat it. 95% of Americans do, but I'm a lot more conscious of the sort of heavy barrier that goes into putting that meat on your table. Like, I am more aware of the life cycle in general too, that like for us to keep on living, something has to die. whether that's a plant, an animal, whatever. But I think that has sort of, I would say, improved my life in a lot of ways, to be honest. So
That's pretty amazing. Yeah, that awareness really came through for me. And the other thing that sat with me from reading that was, I think, gratitude. I
yeah,
got the sense that whatever it is you're putting on your plate now, you're doing it with a lot more gratitude.
yeah, 100% for sure.
That's really cool. I've never hunted myself. In fact, just recently, a neighbor and a buddy have been trying to get me to go out and do a wild pig hunt. So this was really timely to think about how that
Yeah,
would look and how that may go down. And I definitely want to check out Donnie's show. That sounds really cool.
yeah, you should.
A couple other things before we run out of time. I want to bounce around here a little bit. Just fun quote. I love this. Doing hard things, we know it changes us physically. I think we
Mm-hmm.
have a sense that it changes us mentally. A lot of people are David Goggins fans, and he talks about, hey, when you think you're done, you're only 40% done. You bring out some science that, yeah, it's lighting up the emotional brain center more than it is recruiting all your muscle fibers. In fact, just a fraction. So we know that
Yeah,
doing hard things trains us physically. We know it trains us mentally. You've got research around Icelandic people where they're actually showing that tough lifestyles, doing hard things, change our DNA.
yeah,
So just a great quote in here about wintertime in Iceland, the sun coming up for 4 or 5 hours a day, and yeah, sun comes up just to say fuck you, and then sets again.
yeah,
I read that one to my wife yesterday. She loved it. She thought it was hilarious.
yeah. No, Iceland's an amazing place, and yeah, to sort of get into that a little bit. Basically, the island was uninhabited for 1,000 years, right? And then people showed up, and there were these disaffected Vikings from Norway, and they had kidnapped women from the UK. They come, they populate the island. It is super hard to live there, and long story short, is what seems to have happened is that harsh lifestyle seemed to sort of cull the herd a little bit, and the people who survived and spread their DNA, they're a little bit tougher, harder. And now this is probably one of the reasons why men in Iceland live longer than any other men in the world. So it's pretty fascinating stuff. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going into it, and it's all in sort of theoretical stage right now. But it kind of makes sense, and it's worth looking into.
It is, yeah. I mean, there's a lot there. Nothing's ever simple with our physiology and our health,
Yeah.
but some of that leads is to cold exposure. So I
Mm-hmm.
think you talk about heat exposure and cold exposure in your book, and one of the other pieces of research you bring out is something that I think dates back maybe to World War II or so. The women in Korea and Japan who free dive, I think,
Yeah.
for food in cold water. Did I read this right? So you mentioned that they've read their core body temperatures at lower than 95, which is considered hypothermic, but they're
Yeah.
able to persist that way.
Yeah. I think hypothermic is 90. I'm going to forget the exact numbers, but I think hypothermic is 95. But they've often recorded them when they did these studies during the Cold War, and they were at like 94.5 or whatever it might be. And they're cold, but they're not like freezing and lapsing into hypothermia. So it seems that by sort of having to do those dives and that constant exposure to the cold seems to have sort of changed their physiology in a lot of ways. And what was interesting about them is they didn't get sick as much compared to the average villagers. They compared them to other people in their village, and all the free divers, the women, they didn't get they beat them. They beat the villagers in like every measurement of health, which is really interesting. They did get the one thing they did suffer from was like ear problems because of the pressure changes, but that was kind of just a side effect of the job, and
Yeah, no, it's crazy how adaptable we are. Again, super topical with COVID, right? What are some things we can do that maybe make us more
Mm-hmm.
resilient or resistant? I know some of the other research that's come out. A doctor friend of mine was talking about heat shock protein. So
Mm-hmm.
some other things that deal with immunology or resistance in training in heat. So I know
Yeah.
you also mentioned breath. So breath volume for those women
Yeah.
because
I
of the
mean,
free diving.
I think the message is really just that, like, overall in this book, it's like I'm giving a lot of information. There's a lot of different stuff.
Yeah.
And at one point in that cold chapter, there's these researchers who they talk about, spending time in the cold and its ability to essentially ignite our internal furnaces. So we're just burning more calories day to day. And they, they're very clear. They're like, this alone isn't going to save the world, but it's like one extra thing we can do to help. And I think that in the health sphere, a lot of times, like we try and look for that one single thing that's going to fix all our problems. It doesn't work like that. Our environments have changed so much compared to what they used to be. We've lost all these little things that used to sort of toughen us or make us healthier, or it's more like a lack of having those makes us unhealthy, And so now, to bring it back to the temperature thing, it's like we only really live in 72 degrees. We know that these swings can be good for us because they cause our body to do certain things that we need these cycles that we don't have anymore.
Yeah, well, hey, I'm living in San Diego at 72 all the time, right? So I'm just here getting soft. But maybe there's no silver bullet, but one of your gentlemen in the book, friend of yours now, I assume, the founder of Go Ruck, might argue that rucking is pretty close to a silver bullet in terms of sort of full body functional fitness, recruiting aerobic and anaerobic training. And that's what, as I mentioned, I read your article on rucking that hooked me and got me into the book in the first place. What'd you learn about rucking and how good that is?
Yeah. So after I killed the caribou, it's like, we have to pack it out, right? Yeah. It's like more than 100 pounds. It was like all uphill and across the tundra. The tundra is awful to walk on. And, my background working at Men's Health, it's like, they used to send me into like the world's most hardcore gyms, like all the time. Like I was the asshole that got sent in. And so like, as a function of that, like I've done some hard stuff. But this was by far the hardest thing I'd ever done. And it sort of got me thinking about, if you look at the human body and the way that it's built, we basically evolved to run down prey slowly but surely in the heat, and then we would spear it after it would topple over from heat exhaustion. So four-legged animals are much faster than us. They're stronger than us, but they're not good at cooling themselves. So they can sprint, but then they start to overheat. They have to pant, and then they'll sprint again. Whereas humans, we're not fast, but we can just run a long distance slowly. So this is why we have sweat glands all over our body, why we don't have fur, why we walk on 2 feet, all these different things, why we have big butt muscles, et cetera. So there's that. We would run. But what happens after you kill an animal? You have to carry it back to camp, right? We wouldn't just like sit there and feast on it right there, because the men would usually hunt and the women would be gathering. So the second thing that we're built for is carrying. And that hasn't really been talked about or investigated as much. I mean, I'm sure we all know people, and we've done it ourselves, who run for fitness. But how many people just as a workout are like, I'm going to pick up some heavy shit, I'm going to carry it across some ground, right? Not many. So I talked to researchers at Harvard who are kind of studying this, and they're starting to look into carrying and its role in evolution. And, they really say the stuff that we are built for could really be uniquely healthy for us. And the only real tribe I can think of that has integrated carrying back into their lives is special forces soldiers. So rucking, which is carrying heavy stuff in a backpack, is the foundation of special forces training. It's like when we see these documentaries on Netflix about special forces training, they show us like people getting yelled at doing burpees in the surf and, getting sprayed with hoses. And that's like a couple hours of the whole deal. The other, 9 days, whatever it is, tends to be rucking. It's just like, that is the foundation. And so I traveled to Florida, where the guys at Go Ruck, Jason McCarthy, he was a Green Beret, and he started this company that builds these backpacks that they look great in the city, but they're built really for rucking. And he's kind of trying to get this tribe of people to get into rucking, and it seems to be working. So I also met with doctors at the Mayo Clinic who are starting to prescribe rucking to their patients, because it does a couple of things. You're getting the more cardiovascular benefits, sort of equivalent to running, but you're also getting strength benefits, which running doesn't tend to give us, right? Because you've added this weight. It's just more of a challenge on your muscles. But it also has a lot lower injury risk than running. So running is awesome. If you can run, I think you should do it. But at the same time, 20 to 70% of people who run get injured in any given year. So it's tricky, and there's a lot of reasons for this, but mostly they tie back to how we live now and how we're we're big people. We sit a lot of the days. We got mobility problems, and we try and pound the pavement. It tends to backfire for a lot of people. But rucking doesn't have any of that. So it's this really accessible way to hit strength, hit cardio, and also get outside. It's like you don't have to go to a gym to get strong, right? But you don't have to run and maybe compromise your knees to get decent cardio. So it's an exercise that I definitely advocate for sure.
Yeah, I also I'm a tall guy too, 6'4", right? So I don't know about cramming in the duct tape plane, but
Yeah.
with height, a lot of times come lower back problems.
Yeah.
A lot of people that sit too much have lower back problems, and I think you mentioned rucking as one way that it's going to change the way we're carrying weight and the way we walk, and probably a lot of reasons it brings some back health along with it.
Yeah. Yeah. So it tends to, because we sit, we tend to be kind of slumped over, and we tend to maintain that position. And the ruck being at your back sort of tends to pull you into a better position that tends to be healthier for your back. And I mean, to your point about, back problems, I also think that, when we sit and we get that sort of slumped over position, and then we go into the gym for like an hour and we like hammer with these heavy weights, yet we're kind of used to that flex position where your back doesn't like that when you add weight to it. So I think that that's a big problem too. And I think people today, especially like in the fitness world, I think we lift too heavy. Like, I don't like, when you look at how strong humans had to be as we evolved, like we had to just be strong enough. We didn't have to be like freaking power lifters. You know what I mean?
Right, and usually
So
there were complex movements to accomplish something, right? Pick
yes.
something up and move it, not do bicep curls.
Yeah. Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Exactly. And even, the what I could find on like the heaviest weights that people would lift would be uh animal hindquarters, be like maybe 80 pounds. Sometimes we would move rocks that were maybe 80 to 100 pounds. But even that, it's like people try and deadlift like 300 pounds all the time now. It's like, I don't think that there would have been a huge precedence for doing that in the past. And I'm not saying that that's not good for us, but I am saying that when your back starts to hurt, don't say I didn't tell you.
I was talking to my neighbor who is a retired Navy SEAL, and he mentioned functional fitness. He's probably in his early 60s, and
Okay.
he goes, "Look, like these days, I want to train like true functional fitness. I want to train for what I enjoy, and elk
Mm-hmm.
hunting is one of his things, right? So he's like,
Okay.
I'm training to ruck out that hind quarter of the elk. Like
Yeah,
that's his
totally.
thing. But you're some of the hit a couple more things real quick here before you run out of time. I think you mentioned for people who are interested in picking up rucking as you maybe build up weight, keeping it under 50 pounds, I think was one of the things to keep injuries down. Did you,
Yeah.
so you were doing some rucking, I think, to train along the way for Alaska. Did you use boots when you rucked, or does McCarthy recommend certain kind of support in terms of footwear for rucking?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it's like, don't overthink it. It's like, don't wear flip flops. When I was in Alaska, I had boots, but that's just more a function of the land and the fact that it's freezing. So they're like these massive -40 whatevers. But I think really just like any boots are fine. I know GoRuck sells boots that are sort of, they say rucking specific, but I think really any shoe that you would hike in, or even like running shoes, are fine. Once you get into really heavy weights, I think you probably need a little more support. But again, for training, I don't think that there's a huge benefit to going over 50 pounds, especially if you're outside. If you want to go over 50, I suggest people do it in a gym because there's fewer variables. So something like a Stairmaster or a treadmill set to the highest incline and slow. It's boring as hell, but I had to do it just because I knew I was going to be packing out more than 100, So I would do like maybe 80 sometimes. But I think just for general health and fitness, I mean, even like 35 pounds for a dude is great because you're kind of at this sweet spot between being able to move sort of swiftly and well, but also having a load on your back. So, yeah.
Nice. Yeah, my son is thankfully going to be going back to in-person school.
Nice.
And our plan had been, we're only a mile or two from the school, so there's no bus service. Our plan had been we're going to jog it to school every morning, but now I'm
Oh,
thinking
cool.
I'll mix up some rucking. I'll do some rucking, ruck him out to school. Maybe I'll make him carry some of the load, and then I'll ruck
There you go.
back, kind
Well,
of get
hey,
that in.
You
And the
can
more
load them up with books, man.
load them up with books. Exactly. You just want to check in on the gear that you used up there. I was particularly curious about the teepee that you guys use. Is there like a mountaineering teepee that somebody makes
So
now?
the brand that we had is Kafaru, and
Okay.
I think that other brands have since ripped it off. It's made in the US, so it's pretty expensive. But yeah, it's a teepee, and it's packed super small. Now there's not a floor like there would be in a tent,
Right.
which is actually great because then you don't have to take your boots off every single time you go in and out.
I love the sound of that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like a lot more convenient, and the roof is high, so you can stand in it, which is nice too. You're not kind of like trying to get your shoes on and off and slumped over like you would be in a tent. So, I mean, I loved it. Yeah. And the brand is Kafaru, but I think there's another brand called Seek Outside that maybe makes one that's a little cheaper because they're made overseas.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Thanks for that. I think you mentioned Kafaru was the pack that you used as
Yep.
well.
Yep. So when you're hunting, you generally need a pack that is made for hunting just because of the weights you're going to carry out. It's like I don't know, Gregory or North Face or Osprey pack is made for light backpacking. You put more than 50 pounds in that, it's not going to work. So Kafaru makes stuff that's specifically for hunting. So you can have super heavy loads on there. I mean, but there's a lot of brands like Kafaru. I'm trying to think of a few others. That's the only
They'd
one
be
that's
hunting specific.
hunting
Yeah, that makes
specific.
sense. Yeah, that
Yeah.
makes sense. Obviously, not gonna can't fit it in the go ruck.
Yeah.
They're made
Yeah. No.
for weight plates, but they're not going to fit the elk.
Yeah, the G they have one that's called the GR3 now that's kind of geared for travel, but that would actually probably work. I've used that one for like 5 nighters type things. That would probably work. Yeah, if it,
Cool.
I mean I wouldn't take it for a month, but yeah.
Yeah, it's a little bit bigger. Well, I do need to let you get out of here and wrap up, but before I kind of ask, where people should continue to follow you and stay in touch and follow your articles in your book, maybe subtitle here, right, is to live healthier and happier. So, one last note I had on here was about your experience with Bhutan,
Mhm.
and I think the way I read that, or the way I would describe it, was awareness to how fragile life is and
Yeah.
non-permanence, and addressing death effectively, whether it's through hunting or the
Yeah.
death around our life, the life cycle as a human, addressing that rather than ignoring it, just bringing back happiness and maybe again context to our daily lives.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, after hunting, I mean, I started thinking about mortality in general. And in the US, we sort of try and avoid and ignore death, right? Like our funeral system is, we make people look as alive as possible for a final hour-long viewing. Then we put them in the ground and are told to take your mind off it. Our food system is very much set up in such a way that we're not reminded that meat comes from something living. But in Bhutan, it's very opposite. I wanted to know, how do other cultures treat this? And in Bhutan, death is like woven into the culture. So they're told to think about their death at least once a day. There's all these reminders of death throughout the country, that you're going to die one day. And Bhutan is very underdeveloped compared to a lot of other countries. So it's like ranks like 130th or something on the list of development. But they're also one of the world's happiest countries. And there's a lot of reasons for this, but part of it is this awareness, this idea of impermanence that's really woven into the country. So I met with this guy who was a Buddhist leader, and he just talked about, when you are aware that you are going to die one day, that this ride is going to end, that you are walking towards a cliff, and that cliff is death right now, right this very instance. Once you become aware of that, it can change your behavior. Because in the US, we tend to ignore it. It's like we're walking towards a cliff and we're just like, and we get caught up in this everyday just stuff, and by realizing there's a cliff, you can maybe change the path you're on. Maybe you start to realize, hey, I'm going to have a different conversation with the people I'm walking this path with. You can kind of like notice, the beauty of the trail that leads to the cliff. And that tends to change people's behavior for the better. People become happier, and there's that's been conducted in the US at places like Stanford and the University of Kentucky that confirms this. It's like thinking about our death can make us happier by making us realize like, oh, this ride is going to end. And I'm going to start acting in a way that allows me to sort of milk everything I can out of this short time span that I'm here.
Yeah, like killing procrastination, I guess, would be another aspect of that, right?
Yeah,
So instead of like, oh, I'll do it tomorrow, I'll do it when I retire.
totally.
We don't know where the ride's going to end or when. We just know that it will. And
Right.
sometimes, a lot of times, we just don't think about that. So maybe, yeah, I mean, maybe to wrap up on that, it's another great wake up call potentially. Take some positives out of COVID.
Yeah,
Right. Another great positive is we can reflect on. We don't know. Like the world is very uncertain. We're all here for a limited amount of time. It's
totally.
pretty fragile, pretty short. So let's enjoy it. Let's get out there and act. Right.
Yeah.
Let's be happy and enjoy each other. So yeah, no, I appreciate there's so much in this book, Michael, and in terms of gratitude, I appreciate you and appreciate the time to dig into really just a small bit of it. So I really want to turn people onto this, but also the action out of it. Get out and get healthy, get happy, get tribal, ruck,
Yeah.
whatever it might be. So the Comfort Crisis, probably available everywhere books are sold. I think you're active on Instagram. What are the other ways to tune into you and your articles?
Yeah. If you're on social, I'm most active on Instagram. I find Twitter to be a toxic wasteland most of the time. Instagram, I've actually, it has its flaws, but I've met some really cool people on Instagram,
Yeah.
So I'm there, and that's at Michael_Easter. I got a website, Easter Michael. You can sign up for my newsletter there. I just send out random sort of deep dives on different stuff, like ranging from rucking to that harder to kill gene we talked about to all kinds of stuff. So that's a good way to keep up with my work. And then, yeah, the book's available wherever you buy books. So
fantastic. Well, thank you for that. I'll get links to the website and Instagram up on the show notes for this one. And yeah, again, I really appreciate you taking time, especially on a holiday weekend.
Yeah, that was super fun.
Yeah, super important stuff. I mean, this is a crisis, and there's so much good stuff we can go out there and do to change it.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you having me on. That was super fun to chat.